Welcome to Smalltalk Daily for Thursday, October 22nd, 2009. This morning I'd like to go through an overview of the debugger, and what I'm going to do is go through the introductory workspace you'll find in VisualWorks Non-Commercial when you download it. And this is just a walkthrough of stuff you should go through when you're trying just to learn the basics of Smalltalk. And what I'm going to do is go through what you can do to learn the debugger. So let's start off with something like this. Oftentimes when you're writing code, you will write some piece of code that's not going to work. So for instance, here I've got a number and I'm going to send up as uppercase to it. I'm just going to do it. And what it's going to do is break. And when this breaks, you'll see something like this that says unhandled exception, message not understood, as uppercase. Now, oftentimes when you see this, you recognize immediately what the problem is. You just terminate and go fix, or you can go and debug, and that'll bring this up, the debugger. Now, what you're looking at here is the context stack. At the top, you're right at the top of the stack of what was executing. Typically, if you go one down, it'll be where it broke. You may have to go further down the stack if where it broke is code that is system code or code you don't recognize. You may have to go down further to find the actual source of the problem. But here, the second part is right where it is. As uppercase cannot be sent to 3. If this were a problem we could fix, I could change the code here and continue. In this case, it's just showing me that I'm just pretty much stuck. Now, if you look up top here, you'll see these options up at the top. This is for stepping into message sends. This is for just stepping. So the first one here, you're going to dive down into the implementation. So I'd be going into as uppercase. Here, I would just continue where I was, try to execute as uppercase. Here, I'm going to step over a block. So if I had a block of code, don't want to execute it, I can skip over it as if it never happened. Here, I can restart execution from the beginning of this context, meaning this context stack. I can just run, meaning maybe I fixed my problem, I can just run. Here is an interesting one, run this context. Here's another interesting one, run to caret. That means if I knew I had a problem down here, say in code that's not here in this code, but something down here, I could put the cursor down and say, well, fine, let me execute until I get to that point. That's the part I want to debug. So that's the major execution points here. You can jump to the caret without executing any code if you want to skip over stuff. You can return from this context. You can pause the current debug operation. You can just say, you know, this isn't working for me. I'm going to close the debugger. So let's just close this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll a little further down this workspace to another example. So you come down here and you see I've got a little dialog box here. So let's put a halt right at this point. So self halt. This is one other way to raise a debugger without putting a breakpoint in, which I'll get to in a moment. So I'm going to execute this code, and it's going to pop up two dialog boxes for me. So I'll just hit OK, OK. And now it's going to break because I hit a halt. And again, here's my code where it's halting. Here's the method I was in. So let's go back here and step to get back into the code. So stepping got me there, so I'm going to go by that, plus. Now I want to see transcript clear. What does that do? Well, let's send into it and go down. I find out I'm in class text collector in a class called clear. And I'm doing some code here, so I can just step further. So stepping will walk me piece by piece through the execution. And at the point where I understand things, I can just say, well, you know, let me just run that, and it'll go ahead and put stuff here. Now, another way of doing that same thing without putting this halt in, meaning not having to change the code. So if you don't want to mark the code dirty, now that I know that clear is in class text collector, I can go to class named text collector, and I can go ahead and say find the method clear. I can go right here, and let's put the cursor down at this point, and I say, you know, I want to have a breakpoint right there. And it'll put that little stop sign in for me, showing me this is where I'm breaking. So now I come over here, let's highlight this again, and do it, and I'll hit OK, OK, and it's going to break because there's my breakpoint. And I can now do exactly the same thing I did before. Also, if I know what I'm doing, I found my problem, I fixed it, whatever, I can right-click and say, remove this probe, remove all probes. So let's just remove this one. I have to put the cursor down in front of it though. Or I can say remove all probes and get rid of all of them. So it's going to reselect the breakpoint and reissue the command. At this point, I can just keep running it. And again, you see things go out to the transcript. So a couple of different ways you can break things. If you're in a workspace, it's often useful just to put self halt. But if you're in code in the browser, it's often nice to put a breakpoint in, because then you don't have to modify the code. That just screws around with the bytecode and doesn't muck with your source code at all. So that's kind of a brief overview of the debugger I wanted to get to today. And we'll continue on with more specific stuff about how the debugger works, some of the features of it, some of the functions, how probes and one-shot debugging works, all those kinds of things. So we'll leave it there for today. Until next time, have fun with Smalltalk.